Do you want to sound like a native in Spanish? In this video, I'll teach you 3 Spanish slang words that will make you sound more fluent and more like a native. And by the end of this video, you'll know how to use these slang words and sound more fluent in conversations. Learning slang is actually the secret that most textbooks and traditional methods don't teach you. But first, take a look at this.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
I'm Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in Spanish and 3 other languages. Okay, so before we get into these 3 slang words, I actually want to talk about a concept I like to call Spanish versus real Spanish. You probably already know this, but real world Spanish is different to what school and Duolingo and all these apps have been teaching us. You see, when I started learning Spanish, I obsessed over apps and textbooks and all these things because, of course, I thought that would be the method to get fluent. And it wasn't until I really did a lot of research online with people who had actually gotten results, not people who were already native, since a lot of teachers online are people who are already native, who haven't even learned Spanish, they just grew up speaking Spanish. They'll be teaching Spanish that doesn't sound like real world Spanish, and you'll probably notice that a lot of people in real life use a ton of slang words, a lot of shortened words. In fact, even in English, we use so many different slang words, and there are different slang words for different regions, and actually that same thing applies for Spanish as well. Before we get into that, I actually want to talk about something that's even more important than slang, which is pronunciation. You see, most times when people are teaching Spanish, they're actually not even teaching Spanish natives actually use. Because I know you came here for slang, but if you can't even get this right, then slang is irrelevant. Because a Spanish learner saying, hola tío, is not someone who's going to be taken seriously. And so natives don't say, hola, yo hablo español. They don't say that. Of course, they speak correctly with correct vowels and correct pronunciation. But the difference is actually bigger than that. You see, in a sentence like, ¿qué estás haciendo? Or, no te entiendo. Like, these are some examples. If you were speaking with basic pronunciation that's still correct, you would probably say, ¿qué estás haciendo? No te entiendo. But a native would say, ¿qué estás haciendo? No te entiendo. ¿Qué estás haciendo? And so, do you hear that? I'll give another example. A sentence like, voy a ir al supermercado más tarde. A native might say, voy a ir al supermercado más tarde, right? Mercado, skip the D. Skip the S and add an H. Tarde. That's how a native would say it. And so pronunciation is actually way more important to sound native than slang. Though, slang is definitely something to consider, especially if you're using them correctly. But the number one basis is just vowels. If we want to speak real Spanish, which is what this video is talking about, start with vowels. Get the vowels right before you move on to any slang. No one's going to take you seriously if you say, hola, mi pana. Hola. Que guay. And so vowels are essential, okay? The vowels in Spanish are for A, E, I, O, U or A, E, I, U, O. A, E, I, U, O. After that, once you've gotten vowels down, you're still not going to move on to slang. The second part that you want to move on to is being able to pronounce, obviously, the letters and characters. And then being able to speak faster by dropping letters and combining words, just like we did here, right? ¿Qué estás haciendo? No te entiendo. Or supermercado. Or instead of más, right? And then finally, we can get into tone, accent, and slang. And that depends on different regions. And so now that we got that out of the way, the first word I want to talk to you about is mano. So mano, there's an interesting story behind this. So I have a client who got fluent in Spanish in a few months, in a few hundred hours of studying, and he had taken my program for a few months. Quite recently, I was talking to him and we were texting, and obviously we were texting in Spanish just because we could. And he kept saying mano. Now, if you don't know, mano in Spanish means hand, okay? La mano. I actually hadn't heard of mano before being used, right? And so, obviously, following my own frameworks of learn and serve, which means listen, understand, and repeat, and speak, understand, and repeat, I had now listened, or in this case, read, and now I had to understand because I didn't understand mano. So I put it into ChatGPT, and it's a slang phrase, and it's actually a slang word, which is actually just a shortened word for hermano, which means brother. And so mano is the exact same equivalent as bro. And in fact, in Spanish, you can literally also just say bro if you're talking about slang. Now, a lot of people watching this might not use a lot of slang words in English, and this might be irrelevant to you guys. But for people who are trying to use slang words, which if you use slang words in your English vocabulary, you will sound more like yourself if you also use them in your Spanish vocabulary. So I say bro a lot, okay? In Swedish, I also say bro. In Azerbaijani, I also sometimes say bro. I say bro in all my languages. So him also using bro a lot, probably because he's 15, 16, it makes sense for us to use bro. And a lot of time in Spanish, people say bro, like just bro. Bro, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Or in this case, mano. So it's just a shortened word for hermano, which means brother in Spanish. Okay? Real quick before we move on, after years of developing these frameworks and over 100 hours of coaching, I've packed everything into one clear step-by-step program. So if you're serious about learning Spanish, then check the link in the description to join. Back to the video. The next word, or technically sets of words I want to go through, is the word for cool. A lot of times in Spanish, obviously there are different words for cool, but the first one I've noticed is that you can actually just say cool, like cool, and some people will understand that depending on the region, especially if it's closer to America. Another one is chulo, which I think is used a lot in Spain or Colombia. I'm not sure. It depends on the region. And then there's guay. And so you might have heard que chulo, que guay, or sometimes you say que cool. And what you'll notice is in Spanish, obviously we have the correct vowels here, but in Spanish, there's this concept which the Swedish word for it is låneord, which means borrowed words. A lot of times you can just take words from English, and because they're so popular and so prominent and culturally relevant, natives sometimes will also just include those words in their vocabulary. So in Swedish, a lot of times, I'll tell you one pretty common one in Sweden. The word for random in Swedish doesn't actually exist. Like, you can say randomly, which is slumpmässigt. You can say a random event and slump, but the word for random, no one ever actually says it. Everyone in Sweden just says random, from a random, right? Or baggy, right? You could use the word for baggy, but I remember watching his TikTok where this guy was talking about his fit in Spanish, and he said his jeans are baggy, but he was speaking Spanish and he just threw in the word baggy there. A lot of words are låneord, which means borrowed words from English, basically. And so a lot of slang literally just includes English words. In fact, this is a funny concept because it really just shows how, because if you speak English, you're really lucky because English is genuinely speaking like this universal language. But one tip here is, if you are going to use borrowed words from English, just make sure you're using the correct vowels. Make sure you have all the other parts down of the list that I went through. Because natives will say it with their accent. Like I don't know if you heard of this, but it's like this concept called mewing, which is it was like a trend of Gen Z TikTok. And it's basically like this technique to like lift up your tongue or something to make your jaw look better, right? It's like this trend online. And when I visited Spain with my class, everyone there, because obviously we're the same generation, we watch the same content, so everyone knows about mewing, but they said merwing. That's how they pronounced it, merwing. And so it's still an English word. Mewing is for an English word, but they'll still say mewing. They'll say merwing. Same thing with cool. You're not going to say cool. You're going to say cool. Or baggy. You're going to say baggy. Or like the example of mewing, you would say merwing. And so when we talk about borrowed words, we're talking about words that are English words just said in a different accent, right? And like in Swedish, someone might pull up and say honestly instead of honestly, right? But you could say honestly. It works as slang, even though it's an English word, because you say it with a Swedish accent using Swedish vowels and consonants. Same thing applies with Spanish. The last one I want to go through is actually something that has the most variations. And so this one, I chose 3 of them that I've heard personally, and one of them is pretty universal across the Spanish-speaking world. And it's the word for my friend, or it's the word for guy, okay? The word for guy, or think about it like chico or chica, right? Boy, girl, but it could also mean like my friend or like bro, okay? The first one is pana. This word, same thing. It means like my friend, but not in the sense of like if you're talking about someone, but it's more so in the sense of like being informal and like something you'd call your friends, for example. And that's why I also included amigo, because this is also another one that I've heard used as slang in the sense of like you use it in this context of pana. Now, another one that you might have heard all the time, especially if you're studying Spain Spanish or Spanish for Spain, it's tío. Tío means uncle in Spanish, but in Spain, when you use tío, obviously it also means uncle, but tío or tía for girls kind of means like this guy or this girl. But you can also use it to say like bro, like oye tío, ¿qué está pasando? Which is like, hey bro, what's going on? Or yeah. And so this one varies so much. Literally every single region of the Spanish-speaking world will have different words for this. In Sevilla, Spain, so we're still in Spain, but Sevilla, they used illo, I-double-L-O, which is another word for amigo. Do you see how there's so many different ways of saying the same thing? And so, as we saw, some of these are shortened versions of longer words. So if you've heard of a word called riz, that's one example of this concept, where mano instead of hermano. Riz is just a shortened word for charisma. And so when someone has riz, they have charisma. And so riz is a slang word, but it's technically just a shortened word from another word. That's kind of same thing with mano instead of hermano, and you can find many of these. Then we saw låneord, which is borrowed words, which, for example, we have cool, there's also baggy. You could actually technically decide which one you want. Just make sure that when you do use a borrowed word from English, you make sure you put that accent on there, right? And then we have the word for friend or bro or buddy or bud, which is pana in some regions. Definitely, pana is more so in Latin American places. Amigo is more so universal across the Spanish-speaking world, and tío is specifically in Spain. And then extra bonus is if you're going to Sevilla, it's ío or ía. And so the point I want to emphasize here is there are millions of different variations for these, okay? A lot of times, like native Spanish speakers only know their own region's slang words. And so like when they go to other countries that speak Spanish, they might not even understand pana or tío or mano, right? Or some of these other ones. And so slang is specific to countries and even regions. And so these are just slang words. It actually goes even deeper than this. But what I will tell you, for the sake of conversational fluency, these don't even matter that much. This is for sounding more native. And so, like I said, slang matters, but not as much as pronunciation. Your ability to speak fast and be able to speak with a good accent is far more important than your slang. Because if you use amigo instead of tío in Spain, tío might have served you better to make you sound more native. But if you said tío, my tío, you might as well just not have said it because that would just sound embarrassing. Que guay, mis hermanos. Mano, ¿qué estás haciendo? You don't want to be that guy. So you want to start off with pronunciation, get the vowels right, get the letters right and the characters, and get the speed and flow of your speech right. Get your fluency first. After you get fluency, then we can start implementing some native things, some slang words and slang phrases. In fact, in Colombia, I learned to eat a scorpion for breakfast, desayunar alacrán, is to wake up on the wrong side of the bed, right? To wake up in a bad mood. But that's only used in Colombia. So imagine that you were in another place and you said, oh, I ate a scorpion for breakfast. You probably might be misinterpreted. And so slang is specific to different countries and slang phrases are even more specific. And so I would recommend for these different slang, if you want to learn a specific region, go and study that one region. I know we went through these 3 words, but I think it's more valuable for you to just directly ask ChatGPT or ask natives directly, what are some slang words that are used in your region? And then you can sort of pick a certain region to develop that accent. So as a free gift for making it to the end of this video, you can check the description or the pinned comment to grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet where you'll instantly be able to unlock thousands of Spanish words. And it'll take you less than like 15 minutes to go through the whole PDF, and you'll literally unlock thousands of Spanish words. No email needed, no need to opt in. It's just free and yours, just as a thank you gift for making it to the end of the video. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, subscribe, and did all the YouTube metrics and shared this video with someone who you think would benefit, as that helps me a lot. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed, and stay humble.